Serious. Alien abductees, or those who claim to have seen a UFO alien phenomena. What is your story? Part 2. This event occurred in 2011 and has haunted me every day since. I work in networking and all of our hours are late. I usually get off around 2 a.m. and then I'm up for a few hours before I go to bed. This evening, I got off work and it was raining really bad on my way home. When I got home, by chance, the clouds broke and I stepped outside to have a quick smoke. One of my buddies called me and we were chatting about work. It was still not raining and there were low-lying clouds. There were orange streetlights in Allen and they were reflecting off the bottom of the clouds, creating an artificial light. There was a pretty good breeze whipping around, but no rain. I was facing the west and I looked to my right and I see a black cube moving out of the north and traveling south at about 60 to 80 miles per hour. It was moving with a corner forward. This thing was huge. I was astonished to the core of my soul. I sat speechless for a few seconds knowing that I was seeing something amazing. It was 80 to 100 feet tall. It was a black cube in shape and looked like a rough stone surface. On the side of the cube was a border, and within the border was a circular symbol, if that's what it even was. It looked like if you were to draw a circular maze. It was disturbing the air behind it and created a vaporous trail, spinning behind it and then disappearing. There was absolutely no sound. None. If you know Dallas, it was traveling in the direction of southbound 75 Central Expressway towards downtown. I told my buddy what I had seen and he lives a few miles south. I fumbled over my words, telling him and asked him to go outside to see if he could see it. He went out to the middle of his street and looked in the direction that it was coming from. After about 5 minutes, it started to rain again. He stood out in the rain for another 15 minutes but never saw it. Good friend, LOL. Anyways, no one can ever tell me that I didn't see what I saw that night. I've been ridiculed and laughed at, but I know what I saw. It is almost a relief at this point to know that they are really here. I have been a long-time lurker, and I had to get this off of my chest. I've been searching Black Cube UFO for years now, every single day. Cannot stop thinking about it. I have to see it again. This happened a while ago. I was probably around 14 when I saw it. I lived at my old house at the time in very spaced out neighborhood in Texas. It was about 10 p.m. and my dad and sister were outside for some reason in the backyard and I was inside watching TV. My sister comes running in and tells me to come out and see this. In the sky was this massive circular disc, probably about 75 feet in circumference and about 150 feet in the air right above our backyard with circular lights all around it. It's your typical UFO that you'd think of. Anyways, I ran inside to get my dad's camera and came back out and it started moving slowly into the front yard, so we ran through the house into the front, which probably took us 3 seconds. When we got into the front, it was gone. Nowhere in the distance or anything. My whole family saw it and we have no idea what it was. This may have just been a very vivid childhood dream, but whenever I think about it, it never feels like it. It has to be though. Anyway, my mom was a single mom who worked an overnight shift when I was young. Despite this being totally illegal, she used to let me stay home by myself overnight in our apartment. One night, I remember seeing this being in my bedroom. I cowered under my comforter as I watched the being draw glowing lines along the wall near my door. I asked the being what it meant, and in my head, it told me that I would eventually understand someday. This was before I'd ever seen any movies or TV shows with aliens in it. You know the gray ones with the big eyes? I don't think this one was gray though. I kind of remember it being like a sickly greenish white, but it did have big eyes. When I was about 12, my family bought a fishing cabin by a small river about 70 miles from our home. On our first visit to stay in the cabin, it was kind of a work vacation, meaning we were painting and fixing and stuff as well as fishing. One of the people who lived near the cabin came over to say hi and introduce herself. During the course of her visit, she told us, "Don't be afraid of the purple glowing mist you'll see. It's just from the UFOs, and it won't hurt you." All of us kids snickered at this while elbowing each other, so my mom chased us off and apologized to the woman. She later yelled at us for being rude. 2 nights later, we were out night fishing with our dad. The stars were amazing looking without the city's light pollution, and we were all pointing at different constellations and challenging each other to name them. My youngest brother pointed to a perfect circle of about 7 bright stars and asked, "What are those called?" We all kind of froze and stared because, well, there is no such constellation, yet here it was. While we were looking at it, all the stars took off silently in different directions and vanished over the surrounding horizons. We ran. Looking back, it was stupid to run. I mean, the things were already gone, but we were spooked, and we ran as fast as we could back to the cabin where Mom was sleeping. About halfway there, our dad overtook us and ran straight into the cabin ahead of us, slamming the door. When we got in the cabin, he told us, "Just shut up and go to bed." He sounded angry, so we just did that. The next morning at breakfast, when we tried to talk about it, Dad angrily said that he didn't remember any of that and to stop with the stupid stories. My sister asked, "Why did you run then?" He said that he was tired and wanted to get to bed as well. He was tired, so he ran. My dad could be a real goober sometimes. This wasn't the only time we saw things in the sky while staying there, but it was the most interesting. We tried on a few occasions to get pictures, but it was early 60s and cameras sucked half the time back then. At least the cheap kid cameras we had did. We were afraid to ask to use Dad's good camera for that. We only had that cabin for a few years when my dad suddenly sold it. We never could get him to talk about that night. He would firmly deny it every time we tried. Never did see the purple glowing mist though. We looked for it. This actually occurred last week on January 15, 2016. I live in Outer Sunset in San Francisco, and around 7 p.m. poked my head out the window to see if it was raining. It wasn't. I heard a loud aircraft overhead, which was several magnitudes louder than the planes that normally fly in the area from SFO. I looked to my left and saw a plane that appeared to be a commercial aircraft, but I noticed it was much larger, and the lights were super bright and creating large cones of light ahead of it. I remember thinking how neat it looked, being able to see so much of the craft and area around it lit up with such a cloudy evening. When I tried to focus in on it, the lights flickered off, and I lost it completely. I could still hear it very loudly though. About 10 seconds went by, and I see something come alight about 2 blocks to my right. I see a lot of commercial aircraft out there, but this was easily 4 to 6 times larger in the sky than they normally appear. The lights were strange too. I saw what appeared to be 4 white jet exhausts, and across the whole craft there were blue and red lights in lines slowly glimmering. It moved much slower than regular planes and was visible for about 10 seconds, moving north along the beach. It then vanished at about 10 seconds. Confused as hell, I looked around to see if anyone else had witnessed it. Lo and behold, someone on the corner of my street who was riding their bike had stopped and was gazing up at the sky in the same location as the craft had been. I shouted down to them, "Hey, did you see that? What was that?" They turned and looked at me, looked back at the sky, then back at me, then without saying anything, got on their bike and rode away quickly. I could still hear the craft, so I got onto my roof, and about half a minute or so later, saw it come from behind me and slowly fly west out over the ocean until it vanished. I stayed on my roof, waiting to catch it again, but I didn't hear or see it. After about 20 minutes, regular aircraft began flying overhead per usual. My best guess was it could have been some sort of military aircraft, or perhaps several in tight formation. Still the loudest and largest aircraft I've ever seen out there. By the way, thanks for nothing, dude on bike. Let me preface this by stating that almost all of the encounters that I've witnessed have been with at least one other individual. The first 2 encounters happened on 2 consecutive days in 1997, and the numerous other encounters happened over the span of 90 days, a year and a half ago. I do not recall being abducted. I filed reports with the incredibly incompetent MUFON. Back in 97, my buddy and I had just finished up our shift at a pizza joint. It was after 11 p.m. We were wore out and wanted to get stoned. We were completely sober. Anyway, we drove out into a cornfield in the off year, so it was full of rye. We were about a half a mile off the road. It was pitch black, and because of our vantage point, I could see headlights in any direction for a good mile. We were way out in the country, so no worries. My buddy starts breaking up the weed when I notice what I believe to be truck headlights shine directly from behind, take a hard left, and disappear. My buddy didn't seem to notice, but I became frantic. I thought it was the cops. My friend thinks I'm messing with him and continues breaking up some really terrible brick weed. I recall looking at the stars, and one star in particular grabbed my attention. I can't tell you why, but it looked like your average star. Within 30 seconds, this star starts moving up and down, side to side, and in circles. I yelled in a panic, "What the fuck is that?" My buddy gives a dismissive sigh, and then he looks where I'm pointing. For 5 minutes, the UFO continues to move in a very fluid movements, making impossible maneuvers and doing so in complete silence. Without notice, this one object becomes 5 equally impressive star-like objects. They stayed close together. At times, they moved in some kind of formation, and other times they seemed to move independently. Just as quickly as the 5 came, they fused back together as one. We were in shock, but we didn't feel like we were in harm's way. We were recapping what we witnessed, but that single UFO was still there. It wasn't moving too much. We thought things were coming to a close, but we were wrong. This time, the one object turned into at least 7 objects. The way they moved and jerked around felt aggressive to me. My friend must have felt the same way, because he said he was starting to get nervous. I told him we should go. I embarrassingly confessed that I knew it was there for us, and I became fearful. We haul ass out of there, and this thing follows us to the outskirts of town. The stories actually get far more interesting and do include ETs and different types of UFOs. I'll keep going if anyone is interested. I have one. I don't know where I stand on the whole ET UFO controversy, but I can vividly recall an experience from my childhood that I've never forgotten and can't explain. I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. I distinctly remember it because it caused in me a sense of terror, more pure than any I had or have felt since. My parents' house is out in the country, and my old bedroom is on the 2nd floor, with 2 windows facing north and west respectively. My bed was up against the west wall. Just beneath the window, my dog Henry was sleeping with me that night. I woke up to the sound of Henry barking and found my room bathed in light from the window above my bed. I can vividly recall Henry silhouetted, staring into the light, barking her brains out. I jerked up and looked out, but there was only light. A crackly, humming, droning sound filled the air. I was disoriented and terrified, both for myself and for my dog. But all I could do was pull my blankets over my head and curl into a ball. I was sure Henry was going to die. I remember feeling sorry that I was too frightened to help. In my head, the clear thought, "I don't want to die," repeated over and over, and I was aware that it was the first time in my life that I'd ever really not wanted to die. Like, it was the first time I'd ever genuinely felt that I was going to die. The experience ends there. I woke up the next morning with Henry in my bed. I immediately went to my parents' room and woke them up to ask if they'd seen the light or heard Henry barking, but they hadn't. I wondered if I'd dreamt it, but I'd never had a dream so visceral before. All the fear I'd experienced up till that point became a lower classification. Now there was fear, and there was real fear. When I first heard about sleep paralysis, my mind immediately went to that night. It had some of the same characteristics, the terror, the vividness, the weird noises, but I wasn't paralyzed. I moved twice. Once when I sat up and peeked into the light, and again when I pulled my blankets over my head and hid. Have seen several sightings, and each time I become less enthused because they happen so frequently here. First time I was 21 years old, had just left the gym with a close friend, and we decided to sit on my balcony for some fresh air. It was around 8 p.m. Sun had already set, and my apartment was on the highest floor. Great view of the Tucson mountains, and suddenly 5 to 7 lights appeared. It was like someone flipped on a switch, and each one slowly turned on, all equal distance to the next. If you're familiar with the Tucson mountains, there are no buildings whatsoever that could be blocking this area, and typically commercial planes fly over the area, but it's very briefly, and they descend quite quickly. We sat there for about 15 minutes just watching these lights stay in place, when suddenly they moved and became diagonal to one another. I had texted my girlfriend at the time to hurry home, and when she walked in, she immediately started making fun of us, until she stepped out and also saw the bizarre lights. Most recently, I was on my way home from work, headed toward the same mountain range, when I saw about 6 cars pulled over and everyone was grouping together. At first, I assumed a major accident took place, so I pulled over to offer help until I realized everyone was pointing at a similar light formation across the sky. Not sure if the news reported it, but the sighting was freaky enough to stop traffic.